Ladies and gentlemen, the path to success is not hidden. It is not locked behind a secret door. It is guarded by fear. Fear stands at every gate where success awaits, and it is not the strongest who pass through. It is those who dare to face it. Most men do not fail because they lack talent. They fail because they surrender to fear before they even begin. They fear criticism. They fear poverty. They fear defeat. Fear plants doubt. Doubt destroys desire. And without desire, success is impossible. But there is one principle that can slay fear: definiteness of purpose. When you know exactly what you want, when your heart beats for a burning desire, fear begins to shrink. The man who moves with purpose walks faster than fear can follow. He becomes deaf to the voices of limitation. Fear feeds on delay. Every moment spent hesitating gives fear another inch of power. Action is the sword that cuts through fear's illusions. Every bold step weakens the grip of doubt. Every decision, every move forward, starves fear of its influence. Remember, this: failure is never the enemy. Failure is a temporary visitor. It is a teacher, not a jailer. Fear is the real enemy, for fear convinces men that temporary defeat is permanent. It whispers to the heart, "Stop, turn back." And many obey, but the man who refuses to stop, the man who welcomes failure as instruction, robs fear of its power. Success does not require perfection. It requires persistence. It requires courage to look fear in the eye and move forward anyway. The ones who succeed are not those who never trembled. They are those who kept walking through the trembling. Ladies and gentlemen, success demands that you face fear. It demands that you become bigger than the obstacle. And when you do, you will find that fear was only a shadow, and that on the other side of it stands your greatest victory. Fear is the most powerful enemy of success. It is not a loud enemy. It is quiet, subtle, and persistent. It does not arrive with a warning. It creeps in through the cracks of the mind and takes hold before a man realizes he has surrendered. The greatest battles ever fought are not on fields of war. They are fought within the chambers of the mind, where fear and faith wrestle for control. Most men who fail do not fall because they lack intelligence, strength, or resources. They fall because they bow to fear. Fear is the silent force that paralyzes action, clouds judgment, and suffocates desire. Fear enters the heart disguised as caution. It whispers warnings about failure, rejection, and ridicule. It makes a man question whether his dreams are too bold, whether his goals are too distant, whether he is worthy of achieving them. Fear does not shout. It speaks in quiet hesitation. It delays the first step. It magnifies the smallest risks until they appear impossible to overcome. And while the man is standing still, measuring the dangers, opportunity quietly walks away. The tragedy is not that men fail. The tragedy is that they never try. The tragedy is that fear convinces men to abandon their plans before they have even begun. It convinces them that their dreams are foolish, that the mountain is too high, that success belongs to other people. It weaves its way into their thinking until they no longer need an enemy outside themselves. They become their own greatest obstacle. They lock themselves in prisons built by fear and throw away the key. Fear is not always born from real danger. Many times it is born from imaginary consequences. A man fears what others will say. He fears the sting of embarrassment. He fears stepping away from the safety of the familiar. Fear convinces him that comfort is safer than growth. It tells him that failure will break him, but failure does not break the man. Fear does. Failure is only a temporary defeat. It is only a lesson waiting to be learned. But when a man is ruled by fear, he mistakes failure for a final sentence. He mistakes rejection for permanent worthlessness, and so he settles. He lowers his aim. He accepts less than what he was born to achieve. There are countless men with the ability to build great businesses, to lead nations, to create magnificent works, but their names will never be known, not because they could not succeed, but because they allowed fear to govern their decisions. They chose safety over possibility. They chose silence over expression. They chose the comfort of the known over the risk of pursuing something greater. Fear makes men shrink themselves to fit into boxes they were never meant to occupy. A man cannot outrun fear, nor can he hide from it. It finds him whether he stands still or whether he moves forward. But there is a truth that fear will never tell him. Fear grows in the absence of action. Fear multiplies when a man pauses, when he hesitates, when he sits still waiting for the perfect moment. Fear gains strength in the silence between desire and decision. The longer a man waits, the louder fear becomes. The longer he hesitates, the more he believes the warnings of fear to be true. The most dangerous fears are those that live in the mind without challenge. A man must confront his fears. He must speak to them. He must examine them and ask, is this danger real? Or is this fear simply the ghost of my imagination? Fear loses its power when it is brought into the light. But most men never question their fears. They simply accept them as truth. They surrender without a fight. The mind is a battlefield, and fear is one of its most skilled opponents. It uses memories of past failures to build walls around ambition. It uses the fear of the unknown to keep men bound to the familiar. It uses the weight of society's opinions to chain men to lives of quiet desperation. But fear can only dominate the mind that gives it permission. A man can choose what thoughts he will plant and what beliefs he will water. Fear may knock, but it does not have to be invited in. Success begins when a man decides that fear will no longer make his choices. Success begins when desire burns brighter than the fear that surrounds it. Fear will always attempt to steal the keys to the mind. It will try to direct thoughts, shape beliefs, and limit possibilities. But a man can seize those keys and lock fear outside the door. He can discipline his mind to focus on what he desires instead of what he dreads. There is no man who has achieved greatness without standing face with fear. The difference between the successful and the defeated is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move forward in spite of it. Courage is not a gift given to the few. It is a decision available to all. A man must decide that his dream is worth more than his comfort, that his purpose is worth more than his safety. He must become willing to be uncomfortable, to be uncertain, to risk failure, because he understands that standing still is the greatest risk of all. Fear will always paint a picture of disaster. It will always predict ruin. It will always shout about what could go wrong. But fear cannot see the future. It cannot guarantee that failure awaits. It only guarantees that if a man listens to it, he will never begin. Fear promises protection, but it delivers regret. It promises safety, but it delivers smallness. There is no mountain that fear cannot make appear taller. There is no step so small that fear cannot make it seem dangerous. But there is also no fear that can withstand the man who takes one step forward and then another. Fear is a master of illusion. It builds walls that crumble when touched. It plants limits that vanish when challenged. It thrives on inaction. It weakens when a man begins. The man who succeeds is not the man without fear. He is the man who does not let fear sit in the seat of decision. He is the man who hears the warnings but refuses to obey them. He is the man who understands that the pain of discipline is temporary, but the pain of regret lasts a lifetime. Fear may be the oldest enemy of man, but it is also the most fragile. It cannot survive where there is faith. It cannot grow where there is action. It cannot control the man whose desire is stronger than his doubt. The man who conquers fear does not eliminate it from his life. He simply refuses to let it lead. He makes fear follow him instead, and in that moment, success becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Fear is the greatest obstacle to success, yet most people believe their failures come from external forces. They look to the world and say it was the economy, the competition, the lack of opportunity, or the absence of support that defeated them. But the truth is far simpler and far more uncomfortable. Fear defeats more men than all other forces combined. Fear builds walls where there are none. It plants limitations where there could have been possibilities. It convinces people to retreat before the battle has even begun. And so, long before failure arrives from outside, it is quietly constructed from within. The man who surrenders to fear rarely admits it to himself. He hides it behind clever words. He says he is being reasonable. He says he is simply waiting for the right time. He tells himself that more preparation is needed, that conditions must improve, that the world must grant him permission to proceed. But these are only stories fear tells to keep him standing still. Fear does not announce its presence boldly. It whispers, it hides behind false logic and calculated excuses. It makes its home in delay. Fear thrives in hesitation. The more a man waits, the heavier his doubts become. The longer he postpones, the greater the mountain appears. What was once a small step begins to feel like a dangerous leap. The mind magnifies every possible failure, every potential pain, until even the smallest action seems unbearable. The man who could have moved forward with confidence is now frozen by the weight of imagined disaster. This is the silent work of fear. It creates the illusion of impossibility and feeds it carefully until it becomes all a man can see. There is nothing more tragic than the man who trades his destiny for comfort. Fear promises safety, but it delivers smallness. It convinces him to build a life within fences, to walk only well-worn paths, to pursue only what can be guaranteed. He tells himself that he is content with this smaller life, that it is better to avoid disappointment than to chase something uncertain. But in quiet moments, when he is alone with his thoughts, he feels the ache of the dreams he abandoned. He feels the weight of the courage he never used, and though he may never speak of it, he knows he chose fear over faith. The truth is, fear does not have to be defeated once. It must be defeated every day. It waits at every new level of life, at every new opportunity. The man who dreams of building a business will meet fear. The man who desires to speak his truth will meet fear. The man who longs to change his circumstances will meet fear. Success demands the price of courage, and courage is forged in the fires of decision. A man must decide whether he will live according to his fears or according to his desires. He cannot serve both. It is not that fear disappears. It is that action steals its power. A man cannot think his way out of fear. He must move his way through it. Every step forward weakens fear's grip. Every decision made in spite of trembling hands adds weight to the muscles of courage. Fear grows in silence, but it shrinks in the face of movement. It survives only in the absence of action, and the man who understands this learns to move quickly, to act while fear is still gathering its weapons. There is a cruel trick fear plays on the mind. It tells a man that he must wait until he feels brave, that courage is a requirement for action. But courage is not something a man waits for. Courage is something a man builds by walking into the very thing he fears. He will never feel ready, he will never feel safe, but he must act anyway. Readiness is not the seed of success, action is. The man who fears failure often misunderstands it. Failure is not the end, failure is feedback. It is the most loyal teacher a man will ever have. It reveals weakness, but it also offers instruction. It stings, but it also shapes. The man who walks with fear avoids failure, and therefore avoids the lessons that build his strength. The man who confronts fear accepts failure as a companion, and through those failures he becomes more powerful, more disciplined, more precise. Fear convinces many to wait until the path is certain, until all questions are answered, until every risk has been removed. But this moment never arrives. There will always be uncertainty. There will always be the possibility of loss. The man who achieves success is the one who moves forward without the guarantee. He plants his flag in the ground of faith and walks as though victory belongs to him. Fear may walk beside him, but it does not steer him. A man cannot allow fear to become his master. He must choose to become its master. He does this not by eliminating fear, but by deciding that fear will not dictate the boundaries of his life. He chooses to see fear as a signpost rather than a stop sign. When he feels fear, he moves toward it, knowing that the treasure he seeks is often hidden behind the door guarded by fear. The most dangerous fears are not the loud ones. They are the quiet ones that a man accepts without question. The fear of being judged, the fear of standing alone, the fear of wanting too much. These silent fears wrap themselves around the mind and quietly direct a man's choices. They shrink his vision, They lower his standards. They carve out a smaller life while convincing him that he is simply being practical. But practicality is often fear dressed in polite clothing. The man who achieves success is not blind to fear. He sees it clearly. He feels its presence, but he has trained himself to interpret fear as a signal of importance. If something scares him, it likely matters. If something intimidates him, it likely holds value. And so he moves toward it, not away from it. He learns to chase the very things that fear would have him avoid. Fear will always offer an escape route. It will offer the comfort of the familiar. It will offer the safety of inaction. But the man who accepts these offers trades the fullness of life for the illusion of security. He trades his purpose for his comfort, and comfort, though it may feel good in the moment, becomes a heavy burden over time. The man who dares to face fear unlocks the gates to his own potential. He discovers that the obstacles he imagined were far smaller than he had believed. He finds that fear's voice, though loud, carries no real weight. He learns that action is always stronger than hesitation, and in this learning he becomes dangerous, not to others, but to every limitation that once held him captive. Action is the antidote to fear. Fear survives where there is hesitation. It grows in the mind that delays, that waits, that postpones. A man who stands still gives fear the opportunity to multiply, to create new doubts, to invent dangers that were never there. When a man hesitates, his mind becomes a workshop for fear. He begins to imagine defeat. He begins to see failure in places where it does not exist. Fear feeds on inaction. It cannot hold its ground when a man moves. It cannot thrive where decisions are made quickly and firmly. The man who understands this truth does not wait for fear to leave. He does not wait until he feels completely ready. He does not wait for courage to arrive in perfect form. He moves, he steps forward. Even when fear grips his heart, he moves. Action cuts through the fog of fear. Action breaks the chains that fear wraps around the mind. Every step forward weakens fear's power. Every decision strips fear of its authority. Every act of boldness pushes fear into retreat. Fear thrives on questions without answers. It flourishes when a man stands still and asks, "What if I fail? What if they reject me? What if I lose everything?" The longer he waits for an answer to these questions, the more fear grows. But action does not wait for answers. Action creates answers. Action does not wait for the perfect path to appear. Action makes the path by walking it. The man who acts begins to see that most of his fears were illusions. The dangers were not as great as his mind had made them. The obstacles were not as large as they appeared when he stood still. When a man moves, even the smallest step forward creates momentum. Momentum is the enemy of fear. It carries a man beyond hesitation. It gives him strength to continue moving even when his confidence is not yet fully formed. Momentum builds courage. The man who begins to move feels fear chase him, but he moves faster. He refuses to stop. He understands that speed is his weapon. Every time he acts, he places another stone on the foundation of his own courage. He builds a fortress of discipline that fear cannot penetrate. The man who waits for perfect knowledge will never begin. Fear will always offer new questions, new doubts, new reasons to wait. But the man who acts learns that he can correct his mistakes as he moves. He can change direction. He can adjust his plans. He can face challenges one by one, but he must be moving to do so. Fear tells him that action is dangerous, but in truth, inaction is the greater danger. Inaction is the slow surrender. Inaction is the slow decay of desire, the gradual death of dreams. Fear speaks most loudly to the man who pauses. It shouts about the risks. It paints vivid pictures of disaster. But these are only pictures. They have no power except the power the man gives them. When he acts, those pictures begin to dissolve. When he steps forward, fear loses its sharpness. It fades like a shadow under a rising sun. The man who moves realizes that most of the pain he feared was nothing more than imagination. The failure he dreaded was not fatal. The rejection he avoided was not the end. He learns that fear promised more pain than reality ever delivered. Every man who has achieved success has walked this path. None were free from fear, but they acted. They moved when they were uncertain. They decided when they were not fully confident. They trusted that action would clear the path in ways that thinking never could. They knew that action creates knowledge, while inaction only creates confusion. The man who acts gains wisdom from experience. He learns what works. He learns what does not. But the man who waits gains nothing, except a heavier burden of doubt. Action is not simply a tool, it is a discipline. It is a habit a man must build. It is a muscle that grows stronger each time it is used. The first step may feel heavy, but the second becomes lighter. The third becomes natural. A man who makes a habit of quick, decisive action trains his mind to move in the face of fear. He builds a reputation with himself that he can be trusted to do hard things even when afraid. There is no shortcut. There is no secret passage that avoids fear. There is only movement. A man must train himself to step toward the very thing he fears. He must look directly at it and act anyway. Every act of courage makes the next one easier. Every step forward makes the next one faster. Soon fear can no longer keep pace with him. It falls behind, it weakens, it fades. A man does not eliminate fear by waiting for it to go away. He eliminates fear by refusing to give it his time. He moves so quickly that fear cannot settle in his mind. He does not entertain fear's questions. He does not negotiate with it. He does not ask its permission. He acts. When a man builds his life around this principle, he discovers that success does not belong to those who were never afraid. Success belongs to those who acted while afraid. Success is the reward for the man who moves forward, not the man who waits until fear disappears. The most valuable knowledge is not found in books or in planning rooms. It is found in action. It is found in doing. Action reveals what is possible. Action breaks through the walls that fear has built. Action opens doors that hesitation will never touch. And the man who understands this no longer sees fear as an enemy. He sees it as a signal to move, a signal to act, a signal to step forward now without delay. The man who achieves success is not the man who waits until he feels completely confident. He is not the man who believes that courage is a feeling that must arrive before he moves. He understands a truth that escapes most men. Courage is built in action, not in waiting. Courage is not something a man finds by sitting in quiet thought. It is not something he stumbles upon when conditions become perfect. Courage is born in the very act of stepping forward while the hands still tremble, while the voice still shakes, while the heart still pounds with uncertainty. Most men misunderstand courage. They believe it is the absence of fear. They believe they must wait until fear leaves them before they can act. But courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act in spite of fear. The man who waits to feel brave will wait forever. Fear does not leave when a man stands still. It does not leave when he waits for the right mood. It does not leave when he imagines all possible outcomes. Fear leaves when a man moves toward it. Fear weakens when a man steps into the thing he dreads. Action builds courage because it teaches a man what is real. While he stands still, his mind magnifies his fear. It builds terrible visions. It creates mountains out of stones. But when he moves, he begins to see the truth. He begins to see that the mountain is climbable. He begins to see that the pain is not as sharp as he imagined. He begins to see that he can withstand more than fear told him he could. Each step teaches him that he has strength. Each decision teaches him that he can bear the weight. And with each movement, courage grows. Courage is not something a man is born with. It is something he earns. It is something he practices. The man who has great courage did not find it waiting for him at the start of his journey. He built it by facing his fears, by walking toward the things that terrified him, by refusing to let hesitation hold him in place. He made decisions quickly. He stepped forward when his legs were heavy. He acted when his chest was tight, and each time he did, he gathered a little more strength. Each time he did, he gathered a little more proof that fear was lying to him. The man who builds courage knows that fear will return. It will meet him at every new level. It will meet him in every new challenge. It will meet him every time he stretches beyond his comfort. But he also knows that he has faced fear before, and he has walked through it. He knows that fear's voice grows quieter when he acts. He knows that hesitation is the only thing that feeds fear. So he moves, not because he is without fear, but because he has trained himself to move anyway. The mind often tries to trick a man into believing that more time will bring courage. It tells him that if he waits, he will feel braver tomorrow. But tomorrow brings more doubt, not less. Tomorrow brings new questions, not fewer. Courage is not waiting for the storm to pass. Courage is stepping forward in the middle of the storm. It is planting the flag of action in the ground of fear. It is saying, I will not wait for comfort. I will not wait for permission. I will not wait for fear to leave. I will act now. The man who understands this begins to act while he is afraid. He begins to speak while his voice shakes. He begins to lead while his legs tremble. He begins to pursue his vision while his heart races, and as he acts, something shifts. Fear begins to lose its grip. Action silences fear's loudest warnings. Action proves fear wrong. Action builds courage, not in great leaps, but in steady steps. Courage is not always loud. It is not always grand. Sometimes it is the quiet decision to keep moving when no one else would blame a man for stopping. Sometimes it is the small step taken when fear screams that retreat is safer. Sometimes it is the moment a man decides to believe in his ability rather than his doubt. These moments are where courage is built. These moments are where success is born. There is no man who ever built anything great without first acting while afraid. There is no man who ever achieved anything of value without first stepping forward when his certainty was incomplete. The path to success demands that a man move when fear tells him to wait. The man who waits for courage will watch opportunities pass by him. The man who moves while afraid will collect those opportunities and build his future with them. When a man builds courage through action, he changes the way he sees fear. Fear no longer becomes a signal to stop. It becomes a signpost pointing toward growth. It becomes a challenge worth meeting. It becomes the doorway to strength. The man begins to chase the very things that make him uncomfortable. He begins to seek out the edges of his fear because he knows that is where he becomes stronger. He knows that is where courage is built. The man who builds courage through action refuses to let fear choose his life for him. He refuses to let fear shape his destiny. He understands that a life ruled by fear is a life unlived. He knows that courage is the price of freedom. He knows that boldness is the price of success, and he is willing to pay that price by acting when it would be easier to wait, by moving when it would be easier to hide, by deciding when it would be easier to hesitate. The man who builds courage through action carries himself differently. He no longer asks whether he feels ready. He no longer seeks the comfort of certainty. He trusts his ability to figure things out as he moves. He trusts his capacity to withstand the pressure. He trusts that he can build the strength required for the next challenge by stepping into it, not by standing at a distance. The man who understands this truth builds courage as his companion. He becomes unstoppable, not because he is without fear, but because he has learned to act while fear is present. He has learned that courage is the reward for movement, the prize for stepping forward, the treasure found on the other side of decision. He moves because he knows that every time he does, he gathers more of the power that fear tried to keep from him, and that power carries him to success. Failure is not the end of the road. It is the teacher that most men avoid, but every successful man must face. The man who fears failure often lives in hesitation. He tiptoes through life, carefully avoiding every risk, cautiously stepping around every possibility of defeat. But in his effort to avoid failure, he also avoids success. He also avoids growth. He also avoids the deep, life-changing lessons that only failure can teach. Failure is the fire that forges strength. It is the rough stone that sharpens wisdom. It is the bitter taste that prepares a man for the sweet reward. Most men see failure as a sign to stop. They believe failure is a signal that they are not good enough, that they are not ready, that they should turn back. but the man who reaches success understands that failure is not a command to stop. It is an invitation to continue. It is a lesson in disguise. It is a message telling him what does not work, showing him where his plan must improve, revealing the weaknesses that must be strengthened. Failure is the mirror that shows a man who he really is and where he must grow. The man who fears failure gives it too much power. He believes that failure defines him. He allows the sting of defeat to write his story. But the man who studies failure knows that it is not his identity. It is only feedback. It is information. It is a signal that he must adjust, not retreat. The man who grows from failure does not wrap his worth around his mistakes. He does not allow a single defeat to declare his value. He sees failure as the cost of learning, the price of ambition, the toll paid on the road to greatness. When a man fails, he gains what no theory can provide: experience. He learns what it feels like to fall. He learns what it takes to stand back up. He develops a kind of strength that cannot be built in comfort. Failure tests him in ways that success never can. It shows him the depth of his desire. It shows him the weight of his discipline. It shows him whether he will bend or whether he will break, and each time he rises after failure, he grows more certain that he can endure. Each time he gets back up, he silences the voice that told him to quit. Failure is not a signal that a man is weak. It is the process by which he becomes strong. It burns away the false confidence, the untested belief, the shaky foundation. It replaces them with solid ground, with earned understanding, with wisdom that only comes through struggle. Failure humbles a man. It removes arrogance. It sharpens his focus. It demands that he grow more precise, more determined, more relentless. The man who studies failure learns to separate the event from the man. He knows that to fail at something is not to be a failure. He knows that each attempt is part of the process. He knows that the faster he collects failures, the faster he gathers the lessons that bring him closer to success. The man who succeeds does not fear failure because he has trained himself to expect it. He sees it as necessary, not optional. He sees it as a stepping stone, not a wall. Failure teaches patience. It teaches resilience. It teaches a man to keep moving when the outcome is uncertain. It teaches him that the first plan may collapse, but the second, the third, or the 10th may be the one that carries him forward. The man who grows from failure does not measure his journey by how few mistakes he makes. He measures it by how quickly he rises after each fall. He measures it by how much he learns from each setback. The man who fears failure hesitates when he should act. He delays when he should decide. He quits when he should persist, but the man who welcomes failure as his teacher moves quickly. He takes bold steps. He dares greatly, knowing that the risk of failure is also the doorway to success. He understands that the man who fails often is the man who learns fast. He understands that the man who avoids failure also avoids his own potential. Failure gives a man the opportunity to build mental toughness. It gives him the chance to develop discipline. It gives him the ability to face disappointment and keep going. It teaches him that rejection is not the end. It teaches him that losses can be endured. It teaches him that every fall can strengthen his stride. The man who faces failure enough times begins to develop an inner confidence that cannot be shaken by a single defeat. Failure is not the enemy. The true enemy is the fear of failure that keeps a man from moving. The true danger is not in the fall, but in the decision never to climb. The man who refuses to try cannot fail, but he also cannot succeed. He lives a life of quiet regret, knowing he traded the pain of effort for the comfort of safety. But the man who steps forward, knowing that he may fail, lives a life of growth. He collects lessons that others will never know. He develops a strength that others will never touch. Failure is the refining fire. It burns away the unnecessary. It reveals what is real. It sharpens the man who is willing to endure its heat. It separates the man who desires success from the man who only wishes for it. The man who desires success enough will face failure head-on. He will walk into the storm. He will rise after defeat. He will keep moving when the easier choice is to stop. The man who grows from failure develops a kind of power that cannot be given to him by anyone else. It is the power that comes from experience, from battle scars, from the knowledge that he can survive the fall. He understands that failure is not permanent unless he chooses to stay down. He understands that each failure is simply another brick in the foundation of his success. The man who studies failure learns to see it as a teacher that no book can replace. He learns to listen to the lessons it brings. He learns to adapt, to change, to strengthen, to build. He does not curse failure, he welcomes it. He does not hide from it, he seeks its lessons, and through this he becomes a man of resilience, a man of courage, a man who cannot be stopped by the mere possibility of defeat. The man who reaches success is the man who refused to let failure define him. He is the man who stood up more times than he fell. He is the man who kept moving when others surrendered. He is the man who learned that every failure carries within it the seed of equal success, waiting to be uncovered by the man who is willing to persist. He is the man who understands that failure was never his enemy. It was his greatest teacher.